Some people, no matter how hard they try, can't seem to get past their reputation. Welcome to Walking Through the Word for today. We're in John chapter 20, and we're in verse 24, and we're going to possibly finish out the chapter today. Thomas, also known as Didymus, gets a really bad rap. He's been labeled for now, I don't even know how long, as Doubting Thomas. He even makes it into dictionaries and mainstream conversations. You're a Doubting Thomas, meaning that you don't believe it unless you see it. But the truth is, Thomas gets a bad rap. And as we look at this, let's kind of explore it a little bit. So in verse 24, now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. We don't know why Thomas was, but he wasn't there. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." He said to them, "Look, unless I see the nail marks in my hands and put my fingers where the nails were and put my hands into his side, I'm not going to believe." This on its surface doesn't seem like such an absurd statement. I mean, most of us would probably, if not all of us, would probably respond in the same way. "Oh my goodness, you won't believe what I've seen." I don't believe you. We do this all the time. Thomas is saying the same thing. I need more than just your word that this is real, that this is actually going to happen. And remember, we talked about this even last time when he showed them his hand and his sides, his hands and his side. This is an important detail, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But a week later, some translations say 8 days later, his disciples were in the house again. We know that, in other words, John is showing us that this is 1 week later. This is again on a Sunday, what we will eventually start to call the Lord's Day, and it will have precedence in the New Testament. But this is the second appearance of Jesus to the 12, and it also happens on Sunday. Once again, though, the doors were locked, but Thomas was with them. And Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Same greeting, "Be calm, don't panic, I'm here." And then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Now that's where Thomas gets his Doubting Thomas thing. But this is a message for all of us, that we need to stop doubting and believe. But there's very important aspects of this that we need to hold on to. One of the beliefs that starts to take hold early on in the church is the idea of Gnosticism with a G. And Gnostics believed that spirituality was good and that physical was evil and it was tainted. And if you go and you read John's letters, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, you'll see that much of his argument is against Gnosticism. At the beginning of his letter in 1st John, he says, "Whom I have seen and touched." In other words, Jesus wasn't, as the Gnostics would proclaim, just a spiritual being when he came back. He was also physical. That's why this scene right here is so important. When he tells the disciple, "Touch me, touch the holes, see the wounds." Jesus isn't just some spiritual being here. And again, we saw that earlier when Jesus says, "Don't touch me yet." Basically, Mary is clinging to him. We have these scenes where Jesus is physically touched so that John can affirm and argue against this Gnosticism that will show up later. And Thomas says to him, he might have been a little slow on the take of believing Jesus was around, but as soon as he saw Jesus, he makes the profound statement, "My Lord and my God." Thomas believes. Thomas makes the connection. Finally, the light bulb comes on and he recognizes that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Son of God, that Jesus is a part of what we will begin to call the Trinity. Jesus is God. He is saying here, not only are you the person that I'm going to follow, you are my ruler, my Lord, but you are my God whom I will worship. What a powerful, powerful statement by a man who gets a bad rap. And then we see in verse 30, John kind of wraps it up, and what some scholars would say was the first original ending of the letter before John added something to it. And he says, "Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book." There's an implication, and we see it in other things, that there's way too much to record, but we've got to record the highlights, and John tells us why. This is the thesis, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John makes it a point to cover all aspects of Jesus' life, to point to that reality that Jesus is the Messiah. That if you read and believe, you will have no doubt as to why Jesus is the Messiah. This is a beautiful thing that John gives us, and it caps it off with this great story about the appearance of Thomas and the proclamation and the declaration of my Lord and my God. And Jesus saying, blessed are those, because you have seen me, you have believed, but blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Because he's talking about, well, us. All right, we'll talk more next time.